And I remember they offered, it was like 2.5 or something like that million to acquire the company. And then I said no in my like squeaky teenage voice, got on the plane, flew back, and then went to chemistry class.
By 15, Rajiv Khaneja was already hiring adults to work for him. And by 19, he'd done over $1 million in profit. Yet today, at 42, worth over $50 million, not much in his life has actually changed. And that's intentional.
I can see the people whose mind is consumed by their business. And in many cases, that's because they've upgraded their lifestyle.
Rajiv is the anti-lifestyle upgrade founder. And not only that, he also spent many of his early years even lying about his fortune.
I tell friends that I rented the house, but I never told them I owned it.
In this episode, we're digging into why Rajiv lives like this. Does it help him? Does it hurt him? And if he's not spending the money, why keep making so much of it? My name's Harry Morton, and this is Moneywise, a podcast not about how to get rich, but about how your life changes once you're there. By the way, this is a podcast for the community of high net worth founders over at Hampton. If you're a founder doing at least 3 million in revenue, definitely go and check it out at joinhampton.com. Now, I said not much has changed in his life, and that's actually more true than you might have assumed.
So I live in Victoria, BC, born and raised, one of the few.
Victoria, by the way, is a small, quiet island city off the coast of Vancouver. Rajiv grew up there, built his business there, went to college there, started his family there. And yeah, he's still there. But staying in your hometown doesn't automatically make you the anti-upgrade guy. There's a lot more to it. Though, as always, we've got to start with what we're working with here. What's your net worth today?
That really depends on how you value the illiquid assets. But, double blind is approaching sort of mid 8 figures in terms of the investable assets on that side. And that's a majority of it. There's also some other things that I own personally. One of the great things, I bought a mobile home park, 12, 13 years ago. That's done really well. That's a great investment, by the way. So that's done quite well. But yeah, depending on how you value that stuff, it's sort of mid 8 figures for double blind, and then whatever AdButler might be worth. You've seen companies sell, it could be anything.
Outside of your illiquid stuff, if we just talk about the liquid, like what rough portfolio breakdown? How do you manage that money?
Right now, a majority of it is public market equities, which have done quite well for me over the last while. I mean, obviously, stock market's at all-time high today, I think, or close to it. So that's done quite well. As I mentioned, there's a real estate component. So back in 2010-ish, when things had really bottomed out in the US, in the housing market, I sort of saw that as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, which looking back on it, it sort of clearly was. So I tried to buy, as much residential real estate in the US as I could. That's probably like 10% of the portfolio at this point. So real estate, stuff like that, 10%. I didn't buy anything after that because I think there's these windows that open and close, and that was the window for real estate. I think at this point, there's something like 20 angel investments. I don't know what percentage of the portfolio is because it really depends on how those would be valued today, but sure. not that high. But a lot of it's public markets.
So what does your monthly burn actually look like then?
I think it's like something like $30K a month. It's lumpy. So like the base sort of lifestyle, if I don't do anything, and just, it's like the kids' school and the mortgage. Well, I don't have a mortgage, but like whatever. I think that's like something like $15K a month or whatever. If I just sat at home and like made my own food, right? But then, like this year we spent a month in Hawaii in January, and in that month, obviously it went up. So if you sort of annualize it over these things, I don't know, it might be like 25 or 30, because sometimes there's a big thing. And then it's also messy in that a lot of this stuff gets blended with business. So I'll go to conferences, which are actually just, it's like a fun way to hang out with friends and a vacation and learn some stuff. But it's a business expense. But I probably wouldn't do it if it was solely business. So let's say, to give you a terrible answer to your question, somewhere between 15 and 30K maybe. Yeah.
That's what, for a guy that's worth like mid to high 8 figures, that's startlingly low, at least compared to a lot of people we speak to, which is really, really interesting. Tell me, what was the sentiment around money in your family growing up?
So I come from an immigrant family. My dad came to Canada with $8 in his pocket, which was the maximum that the Indian government used to allow people to take out of the country. There was export controls. I've talked to other immigrants, and I think it's pretty common. Someone told me this once, and it just absolutely resonated with me. They said, my parents operate from a worst case scenario perspective. And I think a large part of it is you're taking this giant risk to come to a new country with nothing. And you're coming from a country that doesn't have super strong social safety nets. The downside somewhere in India is way greater than the potential downside than somewhere in Canada. And I think that gets baked into the thinking and the cultural thinking. So their relationship with money was always, you want to save and have enough money in case something goes wrong. You're not going to lose your house. You're not going to lose your car. So I grew up with that. And while we always had enough money, they were very careful in terms of getting value for money, spending money, making sure that nest egg that they're building slowly over time is protected. And then at the same time, they were very transparent with money. So there wasn't that idea that mom and dad would go in the other room and talk about their bills. No, they opened the credit card bills at the kitchen table. Or with my dad making investments, he's really into stock trading, really into investing. That all happened at the kitchen table. He'd spread the newspaper out and look at the stock quotes. So very early on, I sort of grew up in that environment.
Do you feel like it's overly protective? Is that did you have a negative sort of attitude towards it?
I don't think it's positive or negative. It's just a way of being. There's pros and cons. So the pros are, it's a lot less stressful in terms of if a negative event happens, like if someone loses a job or there's a market crash or whatever, it's a lot less stressful because you have this longer runway and these savings. On the downside is it caps the potential upside because you're making far more conservative investments or you're maybe not taking risks in life. So for example, with my parents, they both had government jobs, which are very conservative, safe jobs, where they may have done a lot better in the private sector or by starting their own business. But that's a more risky option. So I never grew up in a house where anyone was stressed about money ever. So I think it's not positive or negative. I think there's good and bad, and you just have to sort of decide what kind of life do you want? Do you want to protect from the downside risk and be less stressed, or do you want to sort of shoot for more upside?
It's interesting. And it seems as though you took more of a latter path, right? You've kind of gone in this sort of entrepreneurial bet-taking direction.
It seems that way. But the first time I made real money, I was quite young. So I started off, I had a $10 a week allowance. And one of the other things that my parents really valued was education. So they scrimped and saved and sent me to an expensive private school. But a lot of the other kids that went to the private school had, orders of magnitude more money than my family did. So I always, I had that chip on my shoulder. I wanted all that fancy stuff. So I was interested in computers and I was playing around on the internet and I made a website and it started to get popular. And this was back in the 90s. And back then, the internet wasn't really for making money. Some people were starting to figure out like how to make money online, but there wasn't even this idea of online advertising. This was 96 or something, or 95. And there was a couple of people dabbling with online advertising. One of them was this company called Two Cows, which I think is still around. And then the Pacific Coast Down Company, I remember. They were selling, it turned out it was someone who was friends with Jeff Bezos and had the idea of selling down comforters and pillows and stuff online. I came across them and they realized that they would pay you money if you put one of these little banner ads on your website. So I had my $10 a week allowance and I went and I did some math and I was like, if only 1 in 10 people that come to my website click on this, I'll make $600 a month. So I put it up And I went and told all my friends that I was going to make all this money on the internet. And back then, when you said you're going to make money on the internet, there's two things that popped into people's minds. Either you were insane or you were scamming people. That was the only two options. There's no legitimate way to make money on the internet. Anyhow, so fast forward, I think it was 90 days when these companies paid you. And my dad comes into the room and he's holding an envelope. And of course, he's already opened it. And he goes, "Hey, this came for you." And he gives me the envelope and I pull this check out and it's for $6. And I just went, oh, I told everyone I'm going to make $600 and I got $6. So I was just sitting there going, what do I do? But it occurred to me that, hey, if X number of people coming to my website gets me $6, then 10X would get me $60, which was now interesting. So I just started thinking, how do I get more people to come to this website? And the website was a jokes website. I mean, I was 14 at the time. So it was full of yo mama jokes, just dumb jokes that I collected on the internet and copy and pasted onto my website. And I thought, how do I get more people to come? And I had seen that on like CNN.com or somewhere, they'd put a web poll where you could vote and get results. And I thought, well, if I put one of those polls on my website, then people will vote and they'll come back to see the results. I'm like, that's what I need. I need people to come back. So I started searching around online to try and find out how to put a poll on the website. And at this point, I had sort of taught myself HTML, and I figured, oh, there must be some kind of poll tag or something. And everywhere I went, people said, oh, no, you can't use HTML for this. You need to learn something called programming, and you need to learn something called Perl, because Perl was the only real way to program online back then. So I was like, okay, how hard could that be? HTML was pretty, I figured that out. So figuring out Perl can't be that hard. At some point, I locked myself in my bedroom and I had a little computer in my bedroom, and I just said, I'm going to figure out how to put a poll online. And I had this little hit counter on my website that would go up by 1 each time someone visited the website. And it occurred to me, I said, a poll's not that much different than a hit counter. So I took that hit counter script and I opened it up and I just started making changes to it. And I'd make a change and then I'd upload it. And programming back then was like very different in terms of programming online. There wasn't all these tools and debugging and stuff. Literally, I'd make a change and then I'd FTP it up to this free site I found where you could execute CGI scripts. And then I'd load it and it would either work or I'd get a confusing error message that just said 500 internal server error with no details. Mm-hmm. So I'd make a change, I'd upload it, I'd get an error, go, oh, I guess that was wrong, change it back, make a different change, upload it, and it would either do what I wanted, get an error, oh, that was wrong, change it back. And I just kept doing that until I had what was probably the world's worst poll script, but it worked. But I realized that while I was trying to figure out how to put this poll on my website, there were a lot of other people asking the same question. How do I put a poll on my website? And they were all getting the exact same answer as me. You have to learn to program. You have to learn Perl. And that was a dead end for 99% of people. It was super hard and complicated. And I thought, if I make a small change to this Perl script that I made, I can go back to all of these people and say, you don't need to learn how to program. You don't need to learn Perl. You can use my Perl script and I'll put one of these little banner ads on the results of their polls. I wouldn't need people to come to my website. I would be able to show ads to the people that came to their websites. So I made that change and went to every forum I could find and responded to everyone I could find and said, hey, you don't need to learn how to program. You can just fill out this form and put this poll on your website. And it absolutely exploded. And suddenly I was getting checks for not $600, but $6,000 and $60,000. It was interesting you mentioned, whether I took the less risky or more risky way. I would say this was very low risk because I was, by the time this exploded, I was 15. living at home with my parents, and there was no downside risk. It was just, it was actually very low risk.
So what did your dad say when he brought in the check with 5 zeros on it?
When I sort of got my first real check, my dad actually gave me great advice. He looked at me and he said, "You should go to the university and hire a co-op student." And at that time, I knew nothing about business. I didn't have any concept of like hiring someone. And I was just like, "Oh, you can do that?" At one point, he had been a university professor. So he kind of had a connection with the university, and he called them up and got me into whatever program you need to be in to hire co-op students. And I went when I was 15 years old to the university and sat across from fourth year computer engineering students and interviewed them. And at the time, I didn't realize how odd that was, but it must have been a very strange situation for these students when, I sat across from them with my voice barely cracking going, "And you know how to program." But I ended up hiring 7 or 8. They started off as co-op students, but then afterwards young grads. But 7 or 8 people to work in this room above my parents' garage. Wow.
That's insane. That's incredible. I mean, how did that feel as a 15-year-old kid interviewing a bunch of big kids with like facial hair?
Looking back on it, it almost seems like a weird fever dream. So I was still in high school at the time. I'd finished high school early because I found this hack where you could like do fewer hours of high school and like challenge exams and then not have to do the actual course. So I finished high school early for the most part. And my principal said, "Well, you can't do nothing in high school." So I've talked to the dean at the university and I've enrolled you over there. So now you have to take university courses. And at the university, nobody cared if I showed up or not. And at the high school, I had this built-in excuse where I could say, "Oh, I have a conflict with the university." So I didn't have to go to high school either. So I would stay home and program on these, with these people I hired, and then just go and do the exams. So it was just this weird time. Stories are popping into my head because I'm going back 20 years here, taking me on the nostalgia path. But I remember at one point somebody wanted to acquire the company and they flew me down to Silicon Valley, took me to like a fancy French restaurant, which was, I wasn't used to that kind of thing. And I remember they offered, it was like 2.5 or something like that, million to acquire the company. And then I said no in my like squeaky teenage voice, got on the plane, flew back, and then went to chemistry class. So it was this weird situation. And I remember,
I love that so much. What, by the way, why weren't any of these students that were working for you enterprising enough to go, "Hold on, who's this squirt hiring me? I'm just going to copy this thing and go do it elsewhere"? Like, I'm interested. Like, did you have a strong sense of like vision back then, do you think, like that was able to kind of lead folks through this, or maybe people just weren't enterprising enough, or I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. So I remember the first person I hired, his name was David, and he was a 4th year computer science who's graduating next semester. And I thought he was going to be like a wizard. I'm like, "Oh, I hired this guy. He's been through years of high level education. He's going to come in and do like 10 times the amount of programming I can do. I've cobbled this thing together. Now I'm getting a real professional, like a guy who knows what he's doing." And he comes in and he sits down and he goes, "How do you run programs on the internet?" And I was like, "What? Okay. Didn't they teach you that in school?" And he's like, No, they don't teach us anything to do with the internet. Like, how does this even work? So I ended up teaching him how you ran, at the time it was called CGI programs, and how a server worked, and how web browsers work, how HTTP you could execute programs and whatever. So I quickly realized that he wasn't a wizard, and that people are people, and most people aren't entrepreneurs.
At 17, Rajiv was making tens of thousands, skipping school, and hiring actual adults to work for him. I don't know about you, but that's a recipe for an insane teen ego, in my opinion. I can't picture many teens who wouldn't spend most of their time bragging about their success and the other half just blowing through a ton of money. But maybe this is why Rajiv got himself into this position in the first place. He did neither of those things.
I wouldn't tell anyone what I was doing. Like I'd go to like high school parties and stuff. And I remember there was this girl I liked, and right at graduation, you had to sort of write down what you're doing next. Was part of like the graduation ceremony. And I wrote down, continue running my tech company or whatever. And this girl came up to me and said, "Oh, that's really funny that you're joking about a tech company." And I was like, "Well, I wasn't joking." And she's like, "What, you really have a tech company?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "I thought you were just a bad student who like played hooky all the time."
You started making seven figures. At what age were you when this was a seven-figure thing?
So I was, I think 19. Yeah, it must have been 19 when I first made more than $1 million.
And how do you stay grounded when you're 19 earning millions of dollars?
Well, going back to the immigrant parents, they were very adamant that I not tell people what I was doing for some reason. So I remember at one point, like a reporter called the house because they'd seen online or something what I was doing and said, "We want to do a story." And my dad just, answered the phone. He's like, "We're not interested." Click, and just hung up. For years, I would tell people that I was a programmer. If they weren't in business or wasn't like, and nobody was in business in Victoria, so anyone in Victoria around that I meet, I just tell them I was a programmer. And I bought a house pretty early on, just to use as an office, but ended up moving into it. And, I'd tell friends that I rented the house because all my friends were in university and they, had roommates and they rented a house. And it was a big thing that, I was able to rent a house all to myself. But I never told them I owned it. So I just kind of lived like this college lifestyle. And it was interesting because there's, this decision to be made, sort of what kind of life do you want? And I remember, in the early days, I sort of calculated, I was like, okay, how much money do you need to have a family at a good sort of upper middle class lifestyle and have everything you need? And, it was like X $1 million or whatever. And then if you never work again for your whole life, you'd be okay. And when I sort of hit that number, I went, okay, now I'm not worried about anything. Inflation adjusted, it might have been like 3 million or something. I kind of made the decision early on not to go to university. So I'd been in university and I said, okay, this is working well. I'm going to take a year off. And then a year became 2 years. I don't want to go to university and just like sit there and learn what I already know. So once I hit that number, I was like, okay, I'm good. I don't need to go to university. I can do whatever I want. No one can tell me what to do.
And what do you think it is about you that was able to be so mature, I guess, or self-controlled with that kind of money? Because I got to imagine, thinking of myself at 19, like I would have gone wild. I did not make that kind of money until much later on. So like, what is it about your personality that was able to kind of handle that?
Well, I was a giant nerd and I was super interested in...
so was I. That doesn't make a difference.
I mean, to me, like programming was fun. I spent like a ludicrous amount of money on a stereo in my car because I got super into like car stereos and audio and getting like little high-end tweeters and putting them in the car. So I had like a couple of obsessions. I think what it was is really that influence from my parents that we don't show off. You act humbly and don't rub money in people's faces. Was a huge influence. So, even when I hung out with my friends and whatnot, no one really knew how much money I had. And I always just had a bit more. But I would, none of my friends were doing crazy things. So I would just do what they're doing. Now, in hindsight, Harry, I wish I had been a little more calibrated to spending money, especially since I know over the last 25 years, I've made more money. But at the time, I think there was two things. There was the humbleness, but also I didn't really know if this was a once in a lifetime thing. Like the internet was super weird. And during this time, we had the dot-com crash where lots of companies just went completely bankrupt. Things, dropped 99%. Like even Amazon stock was down 98% from peak to trough. And I used to go on this website, fuckedcompany.com, and literally the entire point of this website is you'd go to it and you'd see which companies went bankrupt today and what were the crazy stories around that. So it was kind of like the weird, so the stories were like, 3,000 employees showed up at Webvan HQ today to find the doors locked. So they smashed the doors, looted the buildings, took all the Arion chairs home, and the company's bankrupt now. And you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. They raised $300 million or whatever the number is. And that's gone. Right. So I kind of felt also like, oh, this was like a weird internet bubble that I happened to be a beneficiary from. I better hold on to this money a bit, right? Like it might not, the internet might not be a thing in the future. So I think, it was a combination of all of that different stuff. But I do wish, like in hindsight, looking back on it, that I had, treated my friends to, some vacations they couldn't afford. I wish I was like, oh, don't worry, I got the hotel room and just show up kind of thing. I think that would have been a better balance.
Maybe. But I'm also interested in because you said, it effectively sounded like you were kind of hiding. You were in hiding in a way, right? Like you were doing this huge thing, but not you downplaying it or just flat out not sharing it. Like, is there any sense of you? Is there any part of you that feels like you were that you were hiding it, hiding your true self almost? Do you know what I mean? Like you weren't I wonder what that does to your psyche when you're not able to fully be just honest about what's going on in your life.
Yeah. So at the time, most of my friends were friends that went to university or friends I made playing soccer. So that was the other big thing I was into is I played soccer 4 or 5 times a week on multiple different teams. So that was my social circle. And most people are interested in themselves. So one group of friends I had, they were all doctors or med students, and I'd hang out with them and we would just talk medical stuff all the time, which was kind of interesting for me because I like learning new things, but I couldn't interject my problems or business things because they would have no context or no understanding. And at some point, most of those friends moved away. And I ended up going to this startup meetup for the first time ever. Well, it's not true. I went to one earlier, right when I was starting out, and nobody had any clue about the internet. It was all there was I remember this gray-haired guy there being like, oh, you know about the internet? Can you tell me how to use the internet to relay catch information from my fishing fleet? I own 30 fishing boats. It was just stuff I didn't understand or I couldn't connect with. So I'd sort of written that off for 10 years or 10, 12 years. And then finally, this sort of group of friends I had, a lot of people moved away at the same time. And I didn't really have any friends. So I ended up going to this startup meetup to try and make new friends. And there was all sorts of interesting people with various businesses that had to do with the internet. And I made some friends who were in business. And it was to answer your question, it was like a breath of fresh air. Suddenly I was like, oh, I can talk about this problem I'm having with this employee. I might have to fire them. Or I can talk about how to set pricing for this product I have. And I instantly just, there was one particular friend I met there, and I met him for lunch the next day, and we ended up talking for 6 or 7 hours. And it was just an absolute catharsis. And that's our, I really see, people say like, if you're starting out in business, move to San Francisco, move to Silicon Valley, or if you're in biotech, move to San Diego or wherever the hub is. I totally understand that, because for 10 years, like you said, I was kind of undercover in no man's land, and I didn't know anybody who was doing anything in business. And as soon as I did, it was like, it's way better. It was just a massive unlock. So, that advice, I think that's real, like, good advice, is if you're starting out in business, find a peer group. And there's lots of ways to do it now. I mean, I think lots of other cities have more, there's more going on, and there's online communities, and but find that peer group.
Joinhampton.com. I've got to say it. This is like, you've teed me up so beautifully. Yeah, I'm going to for real jump on that opportunity. Let's talk about Hampton for a second. For over a decade, Rajiv was building a company alone with zero founder friends. No one to talk pricing with, no one to talk about firing decisions, no one who got the mental weight of running a business. And then he stumbled into a local startup meetup, made one connection, and suddenly realized that he wasn't crazy. He was just around the wrong people. That's what Hampton is for. It's a private community for high net worth founders, people running real companies with real revenue and real problems. Inside Hampton, you get access to curated groups of smart, sharp founders who've been through it all: exits, failures, fundraising, team drama, you name it. It's kind of like having your own personal board of directors, but they're actually in the trenches with you. So if you're a company doing at least 3 million in annual revenue, definitely go and check it out at joinhampton.com. If you do, you're not only helping yourself, but you're also ensuring that this podcast keeps getting made. And speaking of the pod, let's get back to it. So you've been running like AdButler for 25 years at this point, right?
Yeah, arguably.
Talk me through the revenue timeline since then.
So AdButler really, it started off as a tool for internal use. I had these web polls and a bunch of other products that were all freemium ad supported. And at the peak, we were hosting like 100 million web polls, doing billions of ads a month. And then at some point, I realized I need something called an ad server that would, make things a lot easier and have more features and whatnot. So I just took that sort of ad server we had inside the poll product, put it out as its own product, and that's all it was. So the revenue was like, it wasn't, the polls were the main thing. AdButler was like this side project. And I was like, other people might want this. Let's put this out in the world. So it started off, I don't know what I was making, but like a few $1,000s a month or something. And then at some point I was like, oh, maybe people we'll pay for it and we won't take any ads. And back then I wasn't very sophisticated with pricing or strategy. So I kind of looked at what it cost to serve an ad, did some multiple of that, some pretty low multiple, and went, okay, you can use AdButler for like $10 a month, $20 a month or whatever, depending on how many ads you're serving a month. And it started making a few $1,000s. I don't remember what it was, but very minimal. And I wasn't interested in it at all. I kind of saw ads as this necessary evil, like this terrible thing that made the internet worse, but you kind of needed it to pay for stuff. But I wasn't excited by it. It wasn't cool. But it started making enough money to hire some people that were just focused on AdButler. So I'd hire, a couple engineers and they would just write code for AdButler, but it wasn't really a business. And it just slowly grew every year. So by then it was making probably a few $100,000 a year, like $500,000 a year or something like that. And then sort of by that point, I sort of exited some of the other things I was doing. And over the years, I'd really gotten into stuff that was outside of the internet as well, investing and whatnot. So I was spending my time on that. And then I kind of, in 2014, 2015, I looked at it and said, AdButler is really interesting. There's a real business here. Digital advertising is growing at this crazy rate. That's when I focused it on as a business. Revenue grew from there sort of 40 to 50% a year until now we're doing sort of low 8 figures. And we've always, because it's bootstrapped, we've always been profitable. Now we've gone enterprise and, it's no longer $9.95 a month. And the product's gotten far more sophisticated and meets the needs of, the biggest companies in the world. And the profits from AdButler have gone into another company I had called Double Blind, which is an investment holding company. And those have they're sort of the equal in terms of what they produce.
How did you resist upgrading your lifestyle when your businesses were doing as well as they were?
Something that I started valuing really early on was attentional freedom. And what that is, it means to me is, I know a lot of people in business, especially when I started making business friends, that have these seemingly great lives where in a lot of cases they have control over their calendar. They can go on vacations to the fanciest places with their friends and their family, Four Seasons in Maui or whatever. And I'd go meet up with them when we're supposed to be on vacation. And, their kids will be playing in the beach and they're if you looked at them from like a drone and looked down, you'd be like, that person has the perfect life. They've got the boat, they've got everything. But when you talk to them, they're just ruminating about some problem at work or just thinking they got an email that morning about something. And while their physical body's on the beach, their mind is like 24/7, 365 captured by whatever business problem, investing problem, whatever they have to deal with. I went through years of that where I was just consumed by business and these problems. And in the beginning, it was a ton of fun because it was like I was thinking about these really interesting, fun problems. But like you said, it's been 25 years. And at some point, you're just like, I just want to be able to go on vacation and relax and not think about work and not think about problems. And that's really what I started optimizing for. I didn't really care about upgrading the lifestyle, buying the bigger house, flying private. What I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to like go somewhere like Burning Man or whatever, where there's no internet, and come back and everything's fine. And I could just go for 10 days and not think about work, which, starting at like 15 years old was like, I never had that. I never had a job where at 5 o'clock you just go home and not think about work till the next day or whatever, or on the, Friday, not think about work till Monday. That was like alien to me. So that's what I really spent time trying to engineer. And that, to me, that was like upgrading my lifestyle. It's like once I hit that, and I can see it now in all, I hang out with a lot of people that are in business and are successful. And I can see it when I go, I go to a lake house with them or I go on a trip with them. I can see the people whose mind is consumed by their business. And in many cases, that's because they've upgraded their lifestyle. So they've upgraded and upgraded and upgraded to the point where no matter how much money they have or how successful they are, and there's people at all levels who do this. In some cases, billionaires, in some cases, people are just starting out, whose mind is just absolutely, they can't relax at the lake house. So to me, that was upgrading my lifestyle.
Okay, I admit it, I hoodwinked you, just a little bit. I said Rajiv was an anti-upgrader, but alas, he did upgrade, just not in the same way that we usually talk about on this show. Although to many, it still wouldn't really qualify as upgrading. But having over $50 million and incredibly healthy cash flows and not spending it, well, for some that would be just frustrating as hell. Perhaps that some may include a partner. Rajiv is married, so I was curious to know what his wife makes of his point of view.
Yeah, so I met her, I think I was like 24 at the time, which in terms of like my business journey was actually quite far along, right? So I'd already done quite a bit. But I don't think she ever knew like how much money I had, and she never asked for like quite a long time. And she still has never asked, it's just come out. I'm incredibly lucky in that I found someone who is not materialistic at all. She's very academic. She has 3 degrees. She did a master's in biochemistry and undergrad in biochemistry, and then decided she wanted to do computers and did an undergrad in computer science. And then, after we had kids, decided that she was really interested in art and became a ceramic artist. You can check her out at Saltwater Clay Company on Instagram. And then recently we co-founded a biotech company together called Arvida Therapeutics, focused on mRNA cancer vaccines. So that's the kind of stuff she's really interested in. Like her big splurge, it would be to build a pottery studio. I could probably, buy her what are those, Birkin bags or whatever as a birthday gift. And she'd probably just think I'm crazy. Be like, why would you do that? Having sort of money early on, I was always like hyper conscious about people who might just be interested in my money, which I think is another reason I didn't really tell anyone about it. It just sort of popped in my head. I do remember that, is I was very hyper conscious about people who would like only want to be friends because we had money, or people that only want to date because they had money. I guess I did a good job of finding someone who's not materialistic in that way.
But recently that's changed, as in they did finally buy the big new house. And the price tag was a cool $7 million. I
think in Victoria, the most expensive house that's ever sold here is 13 million. There are more expensive houses that never sold, and that was a few years ago. That's one of the benefits of living in Victoria. You can get a pretty nice place for much less than other cities. I lived in the same house and renovated it 5 times. And it has all those little things that you get over 25 years of living in the same house. So all these little upgrades and things I made that, maximize the sun in a particular way or whatever. But all of my friends moved to a different area of the city. So when I bought this house, my friends all went to university and it was close by to them. So I could go to like a house party, stumble home pretty easily, and it was great. So I bought it for that reason. And all these friends moved away, and all of the newer friends I have are all involved in business. And they all moved to sort of the ritzy area of town. And I love where I live. Like if all my friends lived around here, I'd never move. But most of them live in that other area. So it's become sort of a core. And I read a study, and I think this is totally true, that for men, if you live within 1 mile of your friends, you see them spontaneously. So that means you see them at the local coffee shop, you'll text them, be like, hey, you want to grab a drink? And you can do it without pre-planning. If you live between 1 and 5 miles, then you only really see them when you plan something. And that's where I am right now. Right. So that's, hey, come over on Friday night for dinner, or hey, let's meet for lunch. And that's great. Like, it's fine. But the studies on happiness show that you're happier if you're closer to your friends and if you see them more often. So that was always sort of in the back of my mind. And lots of my friends have been meeting up for things, and I wouldn't go because I have 3 kids now, and it's about a 15-minute drive. So you double that there and back, that's 30 minutes. And if they're meeting for a 20-minute coffee, it's like, I'm not going to drive 30 minutes, have coffee for 20 minutes and come back and burn an hour of dinner time with my kids, right? So I just miss out on a lot of this stuff. So that's part of it. And then the second part of it is that there's other studies on happiness that show you pretty much you adapt to anything you buy. It's called hedonic adaptation. And, that's another reason I've upgraded and bought like lots of fancy stuff, because I sort of know this intrinsically. It's okay, you buy the new thing, and after about 3 months, you go back to baseline. And it doesn't matter what it is. In most cases, you buy a fancy house, you go back to baseline. You buy a fancy car, you go back to baseline. But one of the things that studies show you never adapt to in terms of happiness, just happier forever, is a view of the water. There's something about how we evolved that if you can see a view of the water, you're just calmer and happier. And there's a study in the UK where they sent people happiness surveys on their phones randomly. And it would pop up, you'd answer a question. And when people were near the water and they could see the water, they all were just happier. So there's lots of these studies. So the new house I'm getting, it's on the water. I basically did happiness optimization. So it's closer to friends, it's on the water, and then it has a better ability to host people. So I can have people over. It's got a tennis court, and we're going to put in a pool, and it's got enough land that you can like have parties and have people over. So it's really just a happiness optimization. And my kids are sort of at the age where my oldest is 9, he's turning 10. So he can kind of wander a safe neighborhood by himself. It's got that as well, where the place I'm at right now, there's nowhere to really wander. For him, it's not really a neighborhood. It's more of a car-centric place. It's really just happiness optimization.
For 25 years, Rajiv has run the same company, lived in the same city, and used his money mostly to just quietly optimize his happiness in small, low-cost ways. So it begs the question, why keep growing? Especially since he told me he actually wants to detach more. So I asked him, would he ever sell AdButler?
I think it's a great business. If I didn't want to continue running it, what I would probably do is put someone else into the leadership role, because I see a huge amount of runway with the business. So over the years, it's come up, and I've always looked at it and went, well, if I took the capital out of AdButler, which is really what you're doing when you're selling the business, what else would I do with that money? If I took it out, and, AdButler right now, it's growing 30% a year, 40% a year, depending on the year. I don't know what else I could do that would compound to that same level with the same risk profile. And for most of the other things I want to do, I have the capital to do it without selling AdButler. So I would never say never. I mean, I think if someone came over and offered a crazy number, probably.
My only mild pushback in response to that, or not pushback, but just like question about that, is like if you've already established that you have everything that you materially need to be happy, like what does 30% compounding versus 7% in an index fund where you don't have to think about it? Like why keep push, what's kind of motivating you to keep going in business and things like that?
So I have everything I need to be happy, but my wife and I recently started a biotech company called Arvida Therapeutics, and there's an infinite amount of money you can spend in biotech. There's no cap on that. And I think especially with the technological advancements in AI, we're at a special time where somebody who understands computer science can make, probably over the next decade, outsized contributions to biotech. And this is the reason my wife did a computer science degree, is because when she was in the lab, and this was way before AI, but she was working with all of these machines, and they're all computers, and they're all outputting data. And the scientists have no idea about computers and data. So they would get this huge file from a mass spectrometer and have these very terrible computer science tools to analyze that. And now, especially with AI, it's just absolutely exploding in terms of what you can do. I think we're at a time when we're going to solve all of human health problems. This idea that you get cancer or you get sick, it's going to go away. And the question is, can we accelerate that in a long enough time horizon, assuming that humanity doesn't do something stupid? It's pretty clear to me that'll be solved, right? And a lot of human suffering and misery will be a thing of the past. And I kind of want to be in the situation to accelerate that. And hey, maybe that'll happen in 20, 30 years. Maybe we can do something small that brings that a little bit to the left. So to answer your question, well, I don't anticipate or needing to spend more money. I think having success in business can really, really help in terms of being able to do other meaningful things.
Rajiv's not the only one avoiding lifestyle upgrades. Plenty of people live very frugal lives and well below their means. That's not particularly unique. What is unique is the driver. To contrast, though, Nick Huber is also super intentional about spending less, but for completely different reasons. He explains it all in his episode, and you can click here to hear that.